Do that. Don't
Go
let me
ahead.
bother that.
Okay, I have a bit of a question, which is what you seem to be saying when you say get rid of the capitalist class seems to be opting towards more of a worker co-op situation as the general rule of thumb for businesses. I would think that there might be some situations in which a worker co-op might not be the best option, at least even theoretically. So I think you run into the problem potentially of people who maybe don't want to work in a worker co-op and would prefer a level of stability, or would prefer to be managed that way, or think that leadership would be better if you had somebody specialized at the top instead of the more employee run type of stuff. Would that be allowed under your system? Do you think that that would not even happen? I'm like, how do you deal with that?
Well,
The
worker
idea of
cooperatives, or even the ones that exist today, are fully allowed to elect their own management. And by that system, if people want someone with some special competence or technological knowledge to lead them in a given field, then yeah, they can certainly vote for it. In terms of like direct capital ownership, as in if people would prefer to work in a business where it is completely top down, where all control is directed towards the owner with no
yeah.
control given to the workers, that would certainly not be allowed. No
Hmm.
more so than we would allow somebody to become a king today, even if the subjects of their house were, fully willing to go along with it.
So would the idea of like stock ownership for people who don't work in the company just be completely gone, like outside investment?
Yeah, we
Because
can't have that. There can be systems of
okay,
investment, but not stock. Because as soon as you do that, then you have people owning a portion of the company who don't work there, and that immediately sort of
Yes.
reestablishes the problem.
do you
Yes.
have to work there to have a stake in the success of the company and its productivity and efficiency?
Well, it's not a matter of whether or not you have a stake. It's a matter of whether or not you are a part of the system that is actually producing from that company. I mean, socially, everyone benefits from companies that provide to the public good doing well, but you're going to have to provide that incentive through ways other than stock ownership. Because otherwise, you have capital reinvestment. You get the exact same problem with people benefiting massively from the hard work of other people and, forming their sort of capital empire based entirely off of reinvestment.
I mean, I'm not super sure that that's a problem. I'd be curious. I don't want it to go all day about
Well,
this.
that's capitalism.
And that's
That's
okay.
that's the whole
Right.
system.
Right. Well, I mean, if you haven't been able to tell, I'm somewhat partial to the system because, well, obviously, people who outside buy stock aren't working as hard in terms of labor. They're still contributing an awful lot of value, probably more value than even the hardest working individual employee.
Yeah,
Why?
but then they take that value back because that's the whole point of the stock ownership. They're not giving away something for nothing. In exchange for the investment money, they expect returns on their investment. Ultimately, the whole point of investment is to make more money, not to give. I'm okay with investment projects that have no expectation of return. If you're really invested in the success of a business, give it money.
Oh
Sure, but
yes, I agree with that.
either way you generate. Here's a problem though that I see. There's like two or three problems here. Is the motive doesn't matter because either way you're getting investment. Two, I think the desire to have a money or profit kickback actually makes you more selective with your investments. Instead of just placing it where like you feel like you might feel good, you place your money on companies that you think will actually succeed, which means those are the companies that are actually going to be productive and contribute to the public good.
Well,
Um,
you're likely to invest in what you think will make you money. And as we have
Hmm.
the system now, we have shareholders who elect CEOs, and CEOs are legally obligated to do what is in the good of the shareholder. And
Yeah.
what this means is that a lot of these companies get hollowed out for short term investor profits. The CEOs get a golden parachute and they sell it and it's on the way. Every year, we see more closures of existing firms because, as it
Yeah.
turns out, the needs of the capital owning class and the needs of the public at large are totally separate from each other. The idea that like capital investment is done to the public good, or that it benefits or prioritize the good. There are plenty of ways to economically incentivize productivity within a company that don't involve handing over ownership to a small group of elites outside the company. After all.
Mm. Don, I saw you
well,
shaking
I'm
your head.
curious what ways that might be, but we might have to continue that conversation a bit later.
Well, if it's a good functional business, people should shop there and give it money, should they not?
Well, of course they should, but the decisions made at the top of the business are best made by people with a awful lot of stake, is all my point. And to
Hmm.
your point of investing without potential for profit kickback, that seems to be a little bit of a rosier view of human nature than I take about people who are willing to invest money in companies.
Why
I
not
don't
do grants?
that much investment without them asking, well, what's in it for me?
But we
Uh,
have grant systems. Canada's government gives grants to artistic projects they think might be worthwhile and benefit the public good. Like
Mm-hmm.
Cuphead was funded through it, for example. If
Mm-hmm.
we had a lot of money being kicked back through local, state, and national governments, a sort of grant application system for people who need capital to finance their startups but don't have it in their
so,
pocket seems like it'd
so
be a good way to sort of direct public wealth towards public good.
So I can actually compromise with you there. On the local level, I can actually see a real argument for grants. My concern is that the more nationalized you get, the less stake that the government has in it, right? Because as much as the motive of people who invest privately in the stock market can be, just for self gain, I find that in many cases, the government, because it's not their money, because they're using taxpayer money, they tend to not have much of a stake in what they're investing in beyond, ooh, that sounds nice, or ooh, this will make me politically popular, without driving into the hard numbers of if this business will be successful, which is something that investors who are looking for a profit kickback have to look into.
But
And also,
politicians aren't willing.
I don't really believe in the wisdom or the prudence of government in many
Well,
cases.
we're
And
not talking about the wisdom of government. I mean, you don't want to put
you
much
kind
faith.
of are if you're talking
Oh,
about grants of picking the right good companies to invest in. You're kind of trusting them a little bit.
well, I mean, trusting investors has not historically been a very wise decision when it comes to nationwide economic management, for one. And for two, these grants aren't given by politicians. They're handed out by committees that you apply to. They wouldn't be handed out for woke points or, for the benefit of somebody's campaign. It would
Mm-hmm.
just be something you could apply to, simple, ordinary, bureaucratic. I don't want there to be a system where people can sort of slingshot themselves into rags or riches situations where
Mm-hmm.
corporations can either go like multinational, multi-trillion dollar, whatever, or not. The business should be local. It should be ordinary. The business should be something that serves the local and public good. But right now, like we've seen the opposite. Through mega corporations like Walmart,
Yeah,
we've seen wealth stripped out of the neighborhoods where these
yeah,
Walmarts are
Yes,
placed because
exactly.
and it's down to a difference in material interests. On a surface level, on an Econ 101 level, Walmart seems like it would be economically beneficial for everyone because the products it offers are so cheap. But of
Mm.
course, there were micro economies in these towns beforehand. Sure, the goods cost more, but people were paid more for their work because when those goods cost more, the
Trying to
money
just
went
shut it
back into the
down slowly.
community.
yeah.
Yeah, but the money that goes into Walmart just gets siphoned out. It doesn't re-enter
Right,
the
to the
community.
shareholders and yeah.
Yep.
Precisely. So a lot of
This is
times,
very true.
John, like when we think about, does a businessman or like the CEO know how to invest the money properly into the economy of the society or the people who work there? People don't work at a job when they're 10,000 miles away from it unless they have the luxury of being, college educated and they work for like an accounting firm. If you work at a brick and mortar store and that brick and mortar store is Walmart or Target, the profits from that store don't go back into the community that you're in. It
No, they
gets
don't.
siphoned out
I
into
know this.
whatever other projects they're using. But
Yeah,
shouldn't
I
shouldn't
understand this.
so
Believe me.
shouldn't that say in that decision be in those who are inside that business, those who are a part of it? Shouldn't they make a decision the same way that we stop letting kings make decisions for us? Why are we letting capitalists do it?
Well, first of all, I know that I've been cast as a pure capitalist just because I'm talking to you today. But in actuality, I do have my misgivings, and mass corporatism and the death of localism is a big part of the reason.
Well, you were just
Why
agreeing a
I
moment ago about the local.
Yeah, which is why
Yeah,
I would be
yeah.
sympathetic to some sort of thing on the local level specifically is where I would be interested. I would say if I wanted to put my Tom Sowell hat on, that those people who work in those companies do agree to it by continuing to work there and continuing to shop there. They're voting with their dollar. I
Well, that's
realize
not
that,
that's not really fair, right? Like,
well,
no, that's
fair, maybe not, but true a little bit.
yeah,
Let
but
him
if
get
it's
in.
if it's not like if that doesn't lead to rational decision making when it comes to resource allocation, we don't have to like play by those rules. Like if we look at the effects of Walmart in local communities, we can't go like, well, they chose to do that. They all understood what like the long-standing decades-wide economic consequences would be because they continued to buy goods at a lower price than they did previously. Economically, people will do what's in their best interest, right? So we just have to shape society until people's best interests are what's like the public good.
Okay,
Mm.
so this is the issue is that I think I get really, really nervous about the idea of anybody, quote unquote, shaping society because as you're so concerned about corruption, I am too. I'm concerned about it everywhere, which is why I like most of the power centralized locally, and why on the national level I'm very hesitant about stuff like grants, because I am aware that both the private investors and the public are necessarily going to be corrupt and are necessarily going to be dumb and are almost certainly not really going to be orienting us to the common good, because I have a negative view of how things at national organization
But
level
see,
do. The
you're
only
making
guarantee I
my
have,
argument for me though, because that's my argument against shareholders. Because
right. I'm
shareholders are
saying,
not only like national entities, shareholders are international entities in many
Yes.
cases, like
mhm,
ungodly amounts of wealth controlled by a small group of people who don't even
correct.
have like national affiliation.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the same way that you would prioritize local decision making when it comes to like these incentive structures, so would I. Let the workers who work there make the decisions when it comes to how they should run their company. I think you'll get much better outcomes that way.
Yes.
I, so just to finish the point is, again, I agree with the localism thing, but my problem is that I don't actually trust the idea that the workers aren't just going to metastasize into a new form of government by committee that can be similarly corrupt. At least when you generalize to the level of national. Now the problem gets worse at the international level, but not enough for me for it to overcome this guarantee. Because when I know that once you hit national and international levels, things are always corrupt and are always dirty. But the one thing I do know is at the very least, the private investors are always going to be looking out for production efficiency. And I don't know that that's always going to be true for the gov.
We are using the word always a lot here, so let's be careful.
Well,
Almost
I mean,
much more often are
that's
going to
like
be.
defending authoritarianism because democracy has the potential to be corrupt. Like, first of all, I disagree that investors are always looking out for production efficiency. I think they're looking out for their own profits, and I think that's really easy to substantiate when it comes to their behavior. Like corporation, the like every major corporation has stockholders. There are very few privately owned ones, and
Yeah,
consistently, it seems like we see time after time after time that the shareholders will elect CEOs who will bring about short-term gains for them, or they'll do things that are good for the company in like an economically productive sense, but not good for society broadly, or as is always the case, not good for the workers at that company. I think that like the degree I think that like the myth of shareholder competence should have been like fully destroyed back in 2008. And then the Panama Papers, where it
that's
turned out that they're hoarding tens of trillions of dollars illegally offshore. There's like it's like so obvious how hard they're fucking the system because
Yeah.
they're not like people who live and work here. They're not accountable to what they do and say. They're these like invisible shiftless forces that use money that gets managed by the people they hire to control ungodly amounts of wealth and capital flow just
right.
like as a matter of course, you know? And I
Right.
think that if you bring this down to the local level, which I think does make stuff more trustworthy, if we bring this down to the workers level, not only do we not have the prior issues of like, you know, uh, government being controlled by a very small number of people with different interests than the rest of everyone. But we also see like democratic accountability. If a company is doing really badly, it's no longer this like, oh, well, somebody can just like make a bunch of money off of short term gains, then dip. That can't happen anymore. Now you're really in it for the long haul.
Yeah, so
Hmm.
I would say that a lot of last point here, and I'm not gonna push too much, is that a lot of your issues are things that I would have some policy ideas of how to prevent. I think there's a little bit of protectionism that might be in order. If you want to regulate the stock market in some way to prevent like buys and sells happening too quickly, I'd be open to that. I think we've lost a lot of our spine when it comes to trust busting. I much more enjoy Teddy Roosevelt on that sort of thing. So I think that there's a lot of negotiation room here. Um, but I think I don't want to hold up the show any longer. I want to kind of
I've
get.
I mean,
enjoyed.
no, you're not holding up the show. I thought it was a great
Yeah.
conversation. I want to
Yeah, yeah.
apologize. I
Um,
mean,
I
God
think
decided
it's
to
interesting.
strike at ungodly times, so
No,
that
I'm
really
happy to
sucks.
talk.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
of
it's really
course.
it's definitely
I've been enjoying this conversation quite a bit,
I,
so
I,
don't
I,
worry.
I I think that a big problem in like this discussion, John, and I think what you're like, oh, it works on a local level, but does it work on an international level or wherever it might be? Is kind of asking, well, how do we cooperate internationally? Trade is international, right? Commerce is international. We have money exchanges. So how in the world are we supposed to govern that world without actually taking into account what people want, and we're just left putting in the hand of those who have the wealth?
Yeah, I mean, that's not really my concern. My concern is really that if you have the workers run the show, whatever workers get elected are eventually, I think, going to be corrupted by the power pretty quickly, because that's my view of human nature, and will and the government, if they're doing the sponsorships, they won't have a personal profit stake, so they will make even less informed decisions
Well,
at the
wait,
national level.
I have a question about that on
Yeah,
both
yeah,
points. Because the government already awards grants to a whole bunch of like research oriented stuff, and a bunch of the
Yes.
products that are made by private companies are based on public research. So it
Yes.
seems like there's a precedent for intelligent grant writing on a
this is
government
true.
level, at least at some point. But
Yeah,
also, what you've
but
said
also
about worker corruption, like you said, like, well, if a worker gets elected, they become corrupt. Well, then why aren't the shareholders corrupt? Because the shareholders, well, then I don't know how that's a point.
yeah. No, no,
Because
that's my
if a
point. Is that
shareholder
everyone? No,
if a
my point is that
shareholder is
everyone's
corrupt, like nothing can stop them. Like they're totally and completely unbound. They have the money to do anything they want. But if an elected worker representative is corrupt, it's a pretty simple matter to replace them. And if they don't get replaced,
See,
then
we
yeah,
say
democracy is
that,
a
and yet
problem.
we don't kick our corrupt politicians out of office, especially not on the national level.
Would it be better if they were kings? I mean, I feel like there
No,
is at
but
least some degree of voter susceptibility to your
yeah,
politicians.
I mean, I think that we might be just be coming from fundamentally different places here, because I don't think the metaphor of treating the economy like a system of government that could be kingly or democratic is really the way that I look at it. I think everyone's corrupt, but I think at least the shareholders, unlike the government, are interested in getting their profit back, which means they're actually interested in the company's productivity and success in most cases. Sometimes they pump and dump, and I would be totally cool with regulations to prevent that sort of thing.
Why wouldn't elected workers have that same interest though?
Not why wouldn't they have the same interest to get their profit back?
Like why wouldn't they have the interest to run the company well? If the company doesn't do well, they make less money. Even if they're corrupt, wouldn't they also be monetarily
I thought we
incentivized?
were, well, on the local level, sure. I thought we weren't talking about worker co-ops. We were talking about grant allocations.
Well, with grant, we know that government grant allocations can be for the public good because we see it
Sometimes,
happen
but
when it comes to
but like
research.
subsidies also suck. Like part of the like I'm from
Well, not
California
subsidies,
originally.
just grant allocations. Like if you think you have a promising business idea in downtown and there's like a space that's open, you can like submit a bid and say, "Well, what do I want to do with this space?" Well, I would turn this into a barcade and here's some like concept designs that I have for the floor plan, and then you can make a case for it like at a town meeting or something. Let the public decide, you know?
No,
Why should the public have to suffer the opening of a business no one cares for?
right again at a town, sure, because I think that at that level, the
Well,
politics.
well, then how, John? But how do you then scale that to the fact that economies are not just localized to your town? They're not. You're
I don't
almost ignoring
want
the
to
fact
scale it.
that you
That's the
don't
point.
want economies to scale outside of a local area.
No, I don't want this idea of governmental grant approval to generally scale in all things out to the national level.
Is it because government is icky or something? Like I'm not
I
following.
mean, kind of a little bit. You can put
Well,
it that
John,
way.
you did say that quote unquote everyone is corrupt.
Correct. It's
Ooh,
true.
that's a
You
rough
have to
one.
make that assumption anyway.
Well, I think I worry about that because I feel like like everyone is corrupt is kind of a giant cope. Because in reality, like history is full of examples of organizations and people who have been noble or ignoble, people who have been competent or incompetent, people who have been truthful and not. And it
Yeah.
seems like more often than not, it doesn't just because like saying, well, everyone's corrupt is kind of like a person defending capitalism and saying, well, everyone is greedy. That's not true. If you look anthropologically, humans rose to the top of our planet because of our cooperative abilities. And
That's right.
we try to rationalize like why things are. I think things are the way they are because of material interest. I think that for all of human history, it's been very easy to accumulate power and wealth in a small centralized hierarchy. And as time has gone on, we've tried to push back against that. Like we have liberalism, we have the concept of democracy, and we found that like because I feel like if you like went back 1,000 years ago and you had like a bunch of peasants talking, they'd be like, "Wow, our king is like a drunken, incestuous, murderous lunatic who like slaughters people who
True.
disagree." And then they're like, "Oh, everyone's like that. If you were king, you'd do the same." They're like, "Mm-mm," and it's like, well, no, actually, that's not true. Because maybe the institution of king makes monsters of men, but men aren't necessarily like that. And I
Yeah.
think it's kind of like that, you know? Worker co-ops already exist, and people there tend to be happier and more productive and produce more wealth than people at traditional corporations. So it's like
Not hating on
maybe people
co-op.
aren't all corrupt. Maybe we can build systems where
Well,
Yeah.
people
let
are
me
happy.
let me explain myself. When I say yeah, everyone's corrupt, I'm not saying that literally everyone everywhere is corrupt. I'm saying that when you build systems, especially the larger you get, right? Because the social fabric tends to get thinner the more you scale any system. Um, you should make the underlying assumption that everybody is self-interested and corrupt. That way you can set the proper checks and balances and incentives.
So that's just naturally how a hierarchy
But
works. Is
I'm like, I don't think I think human beings are pro-social, yeah, but I also think that, we're not angels or demons, and we definitely have a worse side of our nature that we always have to be aware of, and we can't happy talk our way out of it, especially not on the national level. And I'm not saying that you're saying that, but that's what I
Well,
mean when I say
well,
yeah.
so I think that like while you're saying, yeah, we have systems and these systems be corrupted, but what we can do is not be like, wow, this is having issues, fuck it, I don't want it, it sucks, as opposed to saying, well, we have these systems, so how do we manage them, how do we create them, how do we make sure that voters are enfranchised, we make sure the voters are educated, make sure that the workers have a stake, we make sure that anyone who's a part of it can actually participate in a way that doesn't lend towards corruption. We can work that out as long as we understand that we need governance instead of just being ill governance icky, let's stop doing that. Right? It's like
I
my
don't know if
roof
we
is
can
leaky. I don't get
assume.
rid of my roof. I just
Yeah,
say I need a bigger roof, and I got to figure out how to give it the support that it needs to stop me from getting, weathered or whatever it might
assuming
be.
corruption from the start in any system, I don't know if that's a good way to go about it. But I understand that like current hierarchies probably do breed narcissists or narcissistic tendencies in people. You know what I mean? But does that mean that any hierarchy that's going to ever happen is going to be corrupt by its very nature just because of the people? I don't know.
I think yes, generally.
Okay.
I Well, I think that human beings are inherently susceptible to corruption, and I think you should take that into account when you're building systems. And I
Well,
think,
do you think democracy is institutionally preferable to like monarchy or authoritarianism?
yeah, probably.
Hmm.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, I've had recent internal doubts about this. I'd say that I still think it. I have always thought, and I will always think that the government needs to be accountable to its people. Exactly how that happens, I've had some thoughts on it. I've reached a transition point. I'm not sure where what I believe
But
in the
what mechanism could you use to hold the government to account outside of democracy?
I mean, I think that I don't know. This is why I find myself not super happy with democracy, but I also find myself at a lack of other options. Great quote: "Democracy is the worst system of government except for all the other ones."
Hmm.
I mean, I think representative republics, which really moderate democracy, making sure it's constitutionally bounded, so you don't have, mob rule and stuff like that's all very good.
But we
Uh,
already have preventions against mob
I
rule.
I know that. Again, I'm just telling you. Like, I'm not saying, not making saying it makes the most
No,
sense
no, I understand. I think it's
right
just
here.
I mean, I agree with like government accountability being a necessary prior. I think the issue, like the socialist answer to this would be that the problem is with bourgeois democracy. The
Mm,
problem right now is that politicians don't give a fuck about the average person because they are
Hmm.
almost exclusively lobbied by and talking with
Yeah.
members of the bourgeoisie. Like the people who give them money, the people who fund their campaigns, the people who
Yeah.
talk with them from their own parties, at every single level, they are day in and day out nonstop insulated with the both wealth and the perspectives of people with very different class interests from
yes.
99.9% of people. And I
Yeah.
think that it's like it's functionally like a new aristocracy, right? Like international capital and the shareholders who control it don't live lives like you and me. Certainly their interests aren't the same as yours and mine. Like they don't it's totally disconnected. So I think the problem is those people have way too much influence. I think that a proletarian state, a worker democracy, would resolve many of the issues we have with corruption, because it seems like so much of the corruption that we see is just politicians, in order to get voted in, have to pretend to be sympathetic to the proletariat, but in reality they aren't, so they lie, and almost always that lying is to resolve the disconnect between what their actual interests are and what they say they are.
Hmm.
Likewise,
Yeah,
like
this
not
seems
just with
typical.
corruption, but one last point, then I'm done.
Yeah.
Not just with corruption, and what they lie about, but also like when we see how they behave and how they campaign, it's so much of it is oriented around like bullshit talking points that are
Yep.
fronted by corporate owned media, and
True.
it's like the whole climate change debate. There would be no debate in this country or in many other countries about whether or not climate change is anthropogenic, were it not specifically for Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he is friends with coal and oil billionaires, went around and set up shop in America, in Australia, in other places, too, all over the place, and literally like one guy, because he's friends with maybe a dozen people who make a lot of money off of fossil fuels, just single-handedly shifted the Earth closer to oblivion. The fact that that's even possible is insane.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I'm gonna move us off this point. I'm gonna move us off
Okay.
this point, and the
I do
reason
want
why,
to-
Been
because
great. This has been great, man. I'm loving this.
we have.
Right
We
on.
let's get in front. Let's do the
I should
next
just
one.
guess the opposite of what my instincts say, and I'll probably be right more often.
The next one is we could have a sitting president under felony indictment and would ultimately be a criminal trial. It would grind government to a halt. We need a government that can work and work well for the American people. Who said this?
I know this. It's a Republican. It's Trump.
Okay, John said it's Trump.
That's my
I'm
call.
actually going to say R, and I'm going to say Chris Christie.
Okay.
Ooh, that's a good call.
I'm gonna trust John. If he said if he had it that quick, I'm going with John. It's Trump.
It's the pattern recognition. It sounds like him to me. Although
What?
it's-
Oh, come on. That's not a good reason.
yeah, well, I feel like he's talking about Hillary. No, wait. Actually, Vaush might be right. We'll see. Vaush might be right. Actually,
Maybe.
we'll
Maybe.
see. We'll go with the instincts.
Okay, let's see who it is. Come on.
No, it's
Technical.
good.
Why is this the laggiest thing I've ever experienced in,
My
in
fingers
the
crossed.
entire? There we go. It's moving.
Where's the reveal?
Oh, come
Where's
on.
the reveal? It's coming. It's
Drum
coming. It's
roll,
coming.
please.
Come
Oh,
on.
dramatic tension.
Dramatic tension
Very
always.
well have a sitting
Ah!
president
Who said
and
Trump?
ultimately
I did.
John. John.
Right.
said
John.
So
John's
John
got it.
has 4 points.
It
John,
would
no, you have 3
grind
points.
government
Vosh has 1 point.
to a
Carr has
halt.
1 point.
We need a government that can work for the American people.
I've done enough Trump impressions. I recognize the cadence. It's beautiful.
I see.
That's
Chris
fucking
Christie was a really
funny.
good guess, though. That's you.
Yeah, that was a good guess. That was a good guess.
That's how.
Yeah, I didn't even think of the Hillary angle at first. That's a good
Yeah.
one, though.
Yeah. Well, I knew Don's like trying to do the reverse psych, and since Trump is in trouble right now, I'm like, okay, it's probably an R. It'd be funnier if it's Trump.
For sure. Yeah, send us our PO box.
Absolutely.
But I think this highlights. I try to pick specific examples that show about how just in the past 8 to 10 years, such massive leaps have changed in the way in which specific politicians talk about their rivals or even the things that they care about. Like the Republican Party has moved so far away from even thinking about DACA. Democrats are completely for gay marriage, and they don't even talk about this idea of like being in debt to China. A lot of it comes out of, so we talk about them being greedy or they're being corrupt. What do you think that this is happening, Vaush? Other than just money,
why do I think they're greedy and corrupt?
other than just greed and corruption, like they are also getting elected on these talking points. How is it happening that within the span of 8 years, a population is unable to recognize that these politicians are full of shit?
Well, I mean, discounting the fact that people are capable of changing their minds on stuff, I think that, like, most people have a pretty Machiavellian attitude when it comes to the perspectives of the politicians they vote for. Personally, I don't give a shit whether or not Joe Biden, like, actually personally cares about gay people. I only care if that's going to be, like, a part of his political bloc. I think most people understand that politicians are mostly in it to rep, like, personal and party interests, and the positions they take tend to be, if not insincere, at the very least, like taking second billing. So I think it's not so much a matter of corruption. I think a lot of it is just, like I said before, responsiveness to bourgeois interests. A lot of the stuff politicians do doesn't really make sense from our perspective. Like, for instance, Joe Biden acknowledges the existence and threat of climate change, but then signs off 1 billion fracking,
Yeah.
permission, like
That's
slips
true.
or whatever, and that doesn't make much sense. And then you realize, like, okay, well, why did that happen? Well, a lot of this happened because of the Ukraine war. Like, it's been ramping up lately, and we're trying to foster like energy independence because we've been reliant on Russia and the Saudis, and for like increasingly severe geopolitical reasons, we can't keep doing that. And then it's like, well, it's not good, but there's a reason for it, But what are those interests? I think for a lot of the politicians, the interests really are as obviously evil as their pals smiles with the wealthy people, and the wealthy people want different shit. And then sometimes it's a bit more complicated. For instance, with the gay stuff, like Joe Biden switching his mind, I don't really know if he personally has changed his mind. My personal guess is that Joe Biden is like one of those keep it to yourself, do it in the bedroom, kind of like mildly problematic religious homophobe types.
Yeah,
And
he's in
that
his mid 80s.
yeah,
Or
he's in his
yeah,
he's ancient, you know. And
yeah.
my guess is that he's not like he was asked like how many genders are there, and he's like smiles at least 3. I don't think he cares that much. I think he recognizes that it's like a big culture war thing right now, but I don't think it's like an animating force with him. So he'll just adopt whatever
Mhm.
position is most politically
Just a bit of
beneficial.
superficiality and like people pleasing kind of thing, right?
That's fine
I'm
for me.
not,
Like
I'm
as
not too
speaking
flexible.
as like a gay person or whatever, I do
Yeah,
not
me too.
care if he likes gay people. I'm totally fine with him being like kind of cavalier and indifferent as long as he's there on the public issues. I don't need him to be like some kind of crazy far left
I
queer
agree with you
ally.
on that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Part of my answer is I think that politicians have changed their minds so much. I mean, I think that part of it is, yeah, invested interests and elites. But I think that those interests are also coming from a different place of just rapid polarization in terms of just basic values. Like America barely agrees on anything anymore, and that seems to have sped up over the last decade and a half in a pretty serious way. And like, I'm not saying that like rich people don't have interests, but I also think that there's more to it,
Well, it's like
because it's not just rich people who I disagree with vehemently. There's also like I
it's
disagree with you vehemently on many things, for example, and I find
fair.
on not just on like policy, on like economic stuff, but I disagree with people all around me all the time on like the most basic values, and I think that that's something that is rapidly accelerated recently. The reasons for that are very interesting, and complicated, and I don't really know all the reasons, but I do think that like not to be like a cliche conservative here, but like the fraying of the social fabric is very real, and I think that that has a lot to do with it.
I think it comes down to bourgeois interest perfectly, actually. Because, like 30 years ago, I think most Americans were what we would today call kind of indifferent to lightly homophobic when it comes to like gay or queer issues, with a
yes.
small portion
Yeah.
of people being militant on either side. And now the number of people who are indifferent is very small, and people are militant on either side. And that is 100% due to a completely artificial culture war started by
Yeah.
the GOP when
Hmm.
they started rambling about trans
Whoa,
people in bathrooms. And the
hold on.
reason they did
You
that
think that's what
is
started it?
the modern like current culture war on queer people thing, yeah, because they lost the gay marriage issue with Obergefell in 2015. So
But
in
why wasn't that the first
2016,
shot?
huh?
Why? So I'm just curious. I
Because
actually
the American zeitgeist has moved towards accepting homosexuality. It's on TV. It's everywhere. It was completely
right,
accepted.
but Vosh, the question for you is why do you feel like as you say, it was like very militant minorities on both sides. I appreciate the consistent grooming, by the way. It's lovely.
My mustache hairs are tickling the fuck out of my face right now. It's so
Fantastic.
No, it's
annoying.
all
It's
good.
true.
I
Yeah.
love it.
But why? So why? I agree that most people were indifferent, and there's like militant side fringes, which is kind of how all politics was for a very long time. Is fighting over indifferent middle. But why would you say that the beginning of the artificial culture war happened with the GOP's pushback, or push, let's say, to keep the language neutral, as opposed to um, Obergefell or something like that? Why do you put the starting gun there as opposed to?
Because well, for one, we know objectively that they were lying. In fact, documents have already leaked, like emails behind the scenes, where it's very clear that a number of Republican politicians, leaders, and strategists were like making stuff up or deliberately over exaggerating stuff, and that they were aware that they were doing it. The thing is, it's like abortion for the GOP. The GOP politicians don't give a shit about abortion. They rape and they have mistresses and they get their abortions quietly. They like personally, they don't care, but
Yeah.
they use it as like a stick with a carrot at the end to try to move people to support other policies that would otherwise be a tough pill to swallow. Pro corporate policies, mostly. Really tough to get like a significant number of people voting for you when your promises make the wealthy wealthier. So you can try to like smooth that over with narratives about how like trickle down economics works, which it doesn't. It's provably not working. But a more effective way is to go, oh, okay, well, let's not even talk about the economic issues. Let's talk about the real crisis facing America: immigration, or
Oh
gay
my God.
marriage, or this or that. And the culture war has always been a way of distracting from the real positions of the party. Though I think recently the positions of the party have shifted to the point where like they actually are number one, like transgenocide, and the economic stuff is second fiddle. Like I think if you asked Marjorie Taylor Greene, like if you could like read her brain or whatever, what does she really give a shit about? I don't really think it'd be like tax policy, you know? I think she just wants gay people dead, and the other stuff is just kind of part of the
You
package.
really think that? You
Yeah,
really
I mean,
think
she's
she wants you
advertising. I'm sorry, John.
dead? Like, is that exact? I'm trying to tell if that's like exaggeration or if
No,
like.
no, no, no. Yeah, I think they do. I think that most Republican politicians and strategists either actively want queer people dead or are okay with them being dead if it serves their political interests. Yeah,
Sure. I mean, she's
I,
advertising to the people that like that kind of shit. You know what I mean? She's advertising herself as someone who likes guns and all the silly shit that she said. I mean, that's to
is a real
attract.
woman. She's a real woman as opposed to
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
a fake woman.
yeah.
But
So she's saying all that
I
to
don't.
get. Yeah.
I'm still not sure why you think it's artificial though, because
Oh, I
like,
can tell
well,
you
we
why I
know
think
they
it's
were lying.
artificial.
We literally have leaked documents.
right, but that
that they-
doesn't mean that people don't actually really truly disagree about these
Well,
three
do you,
fundamental
John? Do
values.
you know about like the hack app, and how Fox News has utilized this hack app where they do stuff?
No, but
Some
I'm not
people are worried about. They'll put out things like some people are worried about X, or a lot of people are talking
Oh
about
yeah,
Y. These are
right,
things that you can't even prove. But we can see that like uproar around CRT and uproar around trans people. You can literally look at
Mm-hmm.
like Google Trends and Google searches are literally related to what did Tucker Carlson have on the news the night before. Like these
Culture war
issues
trash.
okay.
are manufactured. Right?
Yeah.
CRT until Chris Rufo came on Fox News wasn't even talked about. It wasn't even in like
Oh,
the
the CRT
zeitgeist of
thing was
anyone.
so transparent. Yeah, it was like the
Yeah.
greatest
Mm-hmm.
threat to America. But then they realized they would get like they got like more consistent pull if they just focused on the like trans teachers are grooming your kids. So they
Yes.
completely backed off the CRT. Like the spike on Google Trends. It's literally like it's like a needle shooting upwards.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Kind of looks like the
Statistically, yeah.
GameStop stock market thing. It just looks like it's the same.
Yeah,
It's the
they
same.
shorted critical race theory. They
Exactly.
some people made big money
well,
on
again,
that.
I'm not sure that selective media coverage necessarily makes the underlying reality not there. Like I'm not sure.
There is
how-
no underlying reality. They made it up. The CRT thing was fake.
Mhm.
right. So you'd have to demonstrate that to me. But I'm
I
not
mean,
sure.
just like litter boxes in schools was fake, or
Mhm.
just like teachers giving your kids like gender affirming care without parents' permission. Like that never happens.
Really, you think that's
It's
fake?
it. Yes, I'm almost sure that's fake.
I literally went to a school where the policy was that you don't tell the parents. Like that.
That's
literally
fine.
Yeah,
Teachers aren't obligated to tell parents
Right.
everything they hear from
Okay.
their
Okay.
kids.
So now that's my question, because I would
But
say
that's
that
not
it's
gender affirming
artificial
care.
that half of the parents in the country think that's incredibly bad. Like that's not artificial.
Half?
Yeah, just because parents want to have
Yeah.
authoritarian
Yeah.
control over their children's life doesn't mean that the school has to agree to it. Right? There's tons
Right,
of parents
but
that just
that's not
want
what
to
I'm
be.
not arguing on the merits right now. I'm arguing that the value differences aren't just purely manufactured and purely artificial. I
But-
feel like the value differences are real.
Where did the paranoia of teachers not telling parents that about pronouns used at school, like where did that come from?
You mean
The,
who
the
brought
point
it
the,
to their
the problem is like people will be concerned about what they're told to be concerned about. So if you have
Wait.
institutions like Fox News that are getting them concerned over meaningless like insignificant bullshit, then it doesn't really matter if they're actually bothered by it because
Okay,
their concern is fake.
hold on. You're saying it's meaningless and insignificant.
I am.
Again, they don't necessarily think that. You're
I don't.
saying
Wait, no.
manufactured because they dared to bring it to the attention of people who would care.
But I don't care about what they think. Is the thing.
Right,
It's
but I'm not
empirically-
challenging you on the merits. I'm challenging you on the artificiality. If they really do care, if it really is what they think, it's not artificial because Fox News decided to bring it to their attention.
No. By artificial, what we mean is that these are not concerns that arose from lived experience or from an actual awareness of reality, but rather they were told to be paranoid about it by media institutions who benefit from it. So a good example would be like the Y2K bug. The Y2K bug was a panic that was largely non-manufactured. It was fake, but people sincerely worried about it
Oh yeah.
because people are idiots and they fall for shit. And like there were some
Yeah.
tabloids pushing it, but it wasn't like there was a big media conspiracy to make people think Y2K was real. But then you have shit where like there's very obviously a like the litter boxes in schools thing, which never happened and is fake, but
I
people are
never heard
genuinely
that story.
concerned about it as a product of like a deliberate effort to make people worried about it. Like it's the artificiality of what information's being delivered to them.
I
Hmm.
first of all, I don't know anything about the litter box thing, to be honest with you. And I also don't think that the Y2K thing is super relevant because Y2K wasn't real and was never real. 2000 was
Neither's the
never
litter
going to
box
be
thing.
the apocalypse. That was never going to be a thing. And you're saying that Fox News made them care about it. I'm not convinced that that's true. From my read, I think that Fox News and these corporate interests had an interest in driving up their numbers, and like all corporate news has an interest in the panic clicks and all that stuff, and that's very true. But I'm not convinced. I feel like you're reversing the order of operations here when we're not sure we have to. I think that they just didn't know because it was an under the radar policy, and then Fox
It's
brought
not well.
their
It's not
attention.
an
Like,
under the radar.
why is
Wait,
it
wait, wait, wait,
Fox?
wait, wait, wait. But even
Why
your
is it
framing. Wait, 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 wait. But even your framing is wrong. It wasn't an under the radar policy. There is nothing that obligates a teacher to tell parents everything a student says them at school. Like even your framing there, like under the table policy. It's not like a
under the
secret that was
table? I said
kept. This
under
has
the
been the
radar.
case for the history of all education. You
That's
could
my
go back
point.
to like 1723, and back then it also still was not the policy for teachers to tell the
Right.
parents everything that was
But
said to them.
only now are we in a cultural context where this particular result of that policy could have this effect. And
It's
most
not even a
people,
policy.
as
It's
you
just
said, well, lack
it's
of
the
policy,
absence of a
whatever.
policy.
You know what I'm saying. And you're telling me that Fox News is bad because they told parents, "Hey, guess what? This is a thing now." And I'm not convinced that Fox News like made them paranoid. I think that, as you
John,
say, it didn't happen from lived experience,
Let
but
Don
then
Don
it
get in here,
brought to
guys.
their attention, and then there were more stories.
This would
Like,
be
how
like
is this not a
if there
big
was like out of nowhere a million media segments saying that Walmart has a new policy where if your kid goes up to a Walmart worker and says, "Hey, I'm trans actually, can you call me by these pronouns?" and the Walmart worker says, "Sure, okay." The Walmart worker doesn't have to tell the parents. It would be like it is that level of dumb times 10. Like and then
that's not even
everyone
remotely
is like, "Oh my god, why does Walmart have this policy that allows them to trans your children?" Like
that's not
this is
remotely
like
fair.
fear mongering hysteria is the problem. Like this doesn't track onto reality at
we
all.
can we can look at like just numbers. Last year, how many children received like any type of surgery for gender affirming care? And kids is people under the age of 18, right? How many that it was like 253 from the last thing I saw.
Yeah.
And this is already after Fox News made it like a national issue. These numbers are so insignificant that if it wasn't for the hyperfixation of media, you would expect it to not even be within the purview of the people watching or even the purview of the voters. In the same way that critical race theory wasn't an organically emerging issues that parents cared about the fact that their kids are learning that slavery was bad and didn't have benefits in school, that they got an uproar and like they elected politicians who cared
Oh,
about it. It's the
goodness.
same type of maneuver, the same type of political maneuver. I
Well,
don't
if
see why that
I
seems
guess
so
what I
far
would ask,
fetched.
or I would just ask, because we can distill this right by analogizing it. It like
I love analogies so much.
it's a fact that immigrants commit less crime than native
Yes.
citizens on
Yes.
average. So if we've had immigrants for decades and centuries in this country, if there was like out of nowhere this like sudden push by a bunch of conservative media institutions to hype up the danger of immigration, and a bunch of people started sincerely getting like paranoid and fearful about it, I think we could fairly call it like artificial, because even though immigrants do commit crime, every group does, and even though some crimes that would have been listed in those segments would have actually happened, so those individual elements are truthful, the overall social panic is both unsubstantiated empirically and also like completely artificial because it was done to their benefit, like they just wanted to push that narrative. I mean, how else would we know when anything is true if news organizations can just manufacture any narrative and then post hoc justify the legitimacy of their coverage by pointing to all the people they riled up?
I mean, all these media companies, and Fox News included, exacerbate the problem of culture war fever. You know.
I mean, I would say that it's not particularly analogous because, again, the underlying reality of immigrants not committing as many crimes as natives, I think a more accurate thing would say let's pretend in an alternate reality just for a second. A more apt analogy would be immigrants commit slightly more crimes than natives, and people, especially in, let's say, certain areas, and people aren't really aware of this because it's somewhat small. But then all of a sudden, the news starts to talk about it, and maybe it's an art for various motives, and then people say, "Hey, because they commit more crimes, I think that maybe we should have a different immigration policy, even if it's only slight, even if it's only a little bit, and even if it's been true for
Yeah,
a long
but
time."
if
I
things
haven't
but if
noticed.
things were different,
Like,
John, things
it
would be
seems to me that
different.
you are upset because the news noticed and told people, and then they started to notice. Like, why
So
is
what did
the
they
I mean,
notice?
no, but
We don't.
I don't think you're well established to argue about impartiality in media when you refer to this as a policy. Like, again, the teachers not telling the parents of students about the students saying that they're trans or want different pronouns in class. This is as relevant and as meaningful as saying Walmart employees will use the pronouns
That's
they're
not
asked to.
true, though.
No,
Interact
it
with your
is.
teacher every day, all the
It
time.
doesn't matter.
You have school all the time.
No
It's your
one,
primary social environment. These
no
are not
one has ever. It
remotely
doesn't.
comparable situations.
No one has ever fronted the idea that teachers have to disclose this information to parents. And the idea that they should have to just because some trans people exist is ludicrous. We're literally like imposing this first of all, I would argue it's a pro grooming belief because the people most likely to groom children are the family or people directly adjacent to the family, not
Right.
teachers, not even
That's right.
close.
Yeah.
So I think that by like so many instances of sexual and physical abuse are found out because students disclose it to teachers, and I think that that environment of comfort is really really important because the social narrative that teachers are all like gunning for the opportunity to trans children is completely nonsense, you know. So this
Not
fear
all of
mongering is basically just the hysteria of conservative parents who don't want anyone to have any control over their kid but them, but their kid is their own person and they have a
I
right
also,
to
it.
use
Yeah,
different
I don't
pronouns
agree with
in
this.
class.
but I
I
want to
think
add that a
it's
teacher's
fairly.
job is not to report to parents. If a child or a student comes to a teacher with a problem that they have or an issue that they're facing, and that's something that the teacher feels is necessary because teachers are mandated reporters for abuse. They feel that they refer to a counselor or they refer to the school psychologist to go ahead and take that to help that kid do what they need to do or deal with the issues they have to deal. The teacher, that's not what's happening here. Like we talked about the numbers of how many trans kids are actually getting like surgeries, under the age of 18, and whatever those numbers are, it's about 200 something in the last year. And then we look at the fact that immigrants aren't committing higher crimes. Right? So, like, your analogy is if the world was different, then the world would be different.
That's not what I
But
said.
it's not different, right? If they if the news reported on the fact that, for example, does Fox News
I
in,
was
in
making the analogy more accurate. That's all.
yeah, but the analogy is if things are different, then things are different. But things aren't different. Fox News lies. They literally lied about CRT, and they lied about the trans problem, and they lied about the fact that immigrants are more criminal. Like, these are all lies.
Mm-hmm.
Can you not see that?
They did get sued by Dominion for
Massively depends
lying
on the
too.
case, and I'd have to look into it. So I think we can end the segment here. Here's what I'll say. I think that the primary fundamental disagreement is about parental authority. I think, unlike every other person in this room, I think that teachers are mandated that parental authority supersedes government authority. And when it comes to their children, in almost every case, and if a teacher experiences or notices a developmental feature or development in a child that is of sufficient significance, they do have an obligation to report it to the parents because the
Why?
kid fundamentally falls under the authority of the parents, not the
Mhm.
government. And
No, but
therefore, how
but you're
I
conflating something
realize that it's
inaccurately.
incredibly rare now, but the second that parents realized, oh, this is actually possible, and we're actually in a cultural moment where this might tend to happen, they're
You're
worried. And
already
what's right, it
conflating.
doesn't happen a lot, but now they're kicking back to make sure it doesn't happen at all.
So again, a couple of things. First of all, you're conflating. There is no governmental authority here. Nobody's arguing that
Sure.
parents have to disclose this to teachers. It's not an expression of governmental authority for a teacher to listen to a student
And
talk to
not
them.
disclosed to parents.
No. That's no. It is not governmental authority to just not have to disclose everything to parents.
Okay,
Children aren't
fine. Well, then
objects.
parental authority should be large enough to create that mandate.
No,
Fine.
I think, with respectfully, I think that's genuinely psychotic and like groomer talk. I think
It's
that's like
really it's psychotic that if a kid has a
that like everything that a kid
development?
says that could be relevant to their personality development or their identity has to be reported back to their potentially abusive parents. If they're telling this shit to the
Potentially?
teacher but
Wait,
not the parent.
hold on.
Wait, if they're
Potentially.
telling this to the teacher but not their parents, that's a pretty strong indication of how they feel about their parents and the likelihood of those parents taking them seriously, right?
Okay, so this is really the divide. You think that are you of the opinion that any parent who would opt for like watchful waiting as opposed to absolute affirmation qualifies as abusive?
Yes, easily.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is our fundamental value disagreement because I
No,
find
it's
it
an
unbelievably
empirical
psychotic.
it's an empirical one. I'm only citing
Well,
standard medical practice.
yeah. Well,
If a kid
I mean,
if a
other
kid
wait.
says
medical ethics around this issue are not something I
What?
take.
What?
if a kid says like I would like to go by she her or he him pronouns or whatever else, I'm not saying you have to run out to the store and buy them a dick or whatever. You can talk about it with them and work it out. But
Soon,
like
slope will happen, guaranteed.
no, no, slippery slope is literally called a fallacy.
I
Yeah,
know.
it is a fallacy.
No,
No, but like just like shrugging and pointing to slippery slope. They said this about gay people. They said, oh well, first it's gay people, then it's marrying like
Then it's
dogs or whatever.
pedophiles. Then it's blah blah blah. Yep.
Yeah, you got to be really careful about that because that's always because like it's always like, well, sure, there's no harm now, but down the future. But the future
well, the funny
doesn't
thing
happen.
is that after Obergefell, we did have hyper normalization. Even you've gone against kink in pride parades. I know that you have.
First of all, kink and pride parades has been a thing for as long as pride parades have been, and also that's fine. I don't think it should be illegal for people to do kink and
No,
pride
not
or
illegal,
whatever.
but people noticing that cultural normalization does result in actual normalization over
I,
time.
I would
Like,
take I would take gay people being
course that's
cringe at pride parades over them being beaten and arrested
well,
at their pride
Yes.
parades any day.
of course, but I don't think
One
that
second.
is.
One
That is
second. One
the
second.
dynamic. Yeah,
One
no,
second. One second.
you
Here. One
argue
second.
about the consequences of normalization. That is what you're arguing against. Yeah, it's that is the dynamic. It's
John,
gay
let's
people being loud and cringe, or it's gay people being beaten and arrested.
I do not accept this false binary at all.
That is that is literally the
Let's talk
line on
fallacy.
I
legalization.
want to get in here on something because I actually want to. I just want to point something out, John. Doesn't seem like the safety of the kid is always but come first, right? Like
Correct, but
the government can
policy
take
prevention
the
of
child
safety.
away if the parents are like, for instance, abusive.
Yes,
Surely you
actually,
agree that that's a good thing,
I
right?
agree. The difference is what we define as abusive.
Wait, no.
Yeah.
The
Well,
difference
I
is
mean,
one
gay and
second. No,
trans kids
the
being
difference is who do
going
we?
home
Who,
after. Dude, can I get in? I'm sorry.
No,
Gay and trans
I'm not
kids
rolling eyes at you. Carl.
Gay and trans kids do get abused by their parents when, say, for instance, if teachers are required to disclose this information, that will be a thing that you're going to have to ethically deal with in your own camp, right? That's
Sure,
something that's going to happen.
Like if you want to, if I would be open to a policy where, let's say, the kid doesn't want to tell the parents, and if the kid first of all, if the kid like reports like physical abuse or like a fear of physical abuse, then that's something else. But if they just say, oh, my parents don't really believe in that stuff, I'm totally still cool with like maybe watching the parents to make sure they don't physically beat the kid. But if the parents just like have
How
like
would
a
we monitor that? How would that logistically? I don't see how that would even work.
what do you mean you don't see how that works? See,
Look, I decided to tell my parents I was gay. It didn't go well.
If they're actually being hit. But saying that like parents who take a watchful waiting strategy are outright abusive is like it's an insane position.
Well, I think it's insane. Well, it's bad for the parents to do that, sure, but I think it's even worse to deny the child spaces of comfort where they can acknowledge and have their identity acknowledged by other people. Like, for instance, I think there's lots of shitty things that a parent can do that are pretty abusive, but aren't like illegal. Like, there are lots of things. There are lots of bad parents out there. But normally, what you can say is like, okay, so maybe the parents are shit, but there are still like friends that you can go to. There's like maybe your parents are homophobic. That's not illegal. But if you've got like a gay 13-year-old kid or something, then one of the best things that you can do for a person in that position is give them a space where they can like comfortably assert their identity without judgment.
By the way, this conversation kind of implies the truth of what I said about a fundamental value disagreement of
yeah, but
so I just want to point that out.
Would you agree that corporal punishment is a form of abuse?
In almost all cases, yeah. I mean, like I was spanked a little bit as a kid. I was abused, but like generally, sure.
Sure. How did society? What were the mechanisms that allowed us to understand and develop the knowledge that corporal punishment is abuse?
Psychology.
Sure. Yeah, it was right.
Okay.
Once. So is you're telling me?
Oh wait, no. One second. Instead of going, follow me along. What are the mechanisms today that we still rely on to let us know whether behaviors by adults are abusive to children?
It's the same institutions, but the institutions have been changed in multiple ways since then. And even if they hadn't, being correct once doesn't mean that you're correct the second time. This point has
How have
been.
they
And
changed?
and this is for me. This
That
is
was
for
no
me. When you
question.
talk about when you talk about the value difference, you do
Yeah.
this like double-edged sword. You do this like I'm on my way to the store to get a tinfoil hat because the institutions are like destroyed and commanded by like some leftist academics. While at
Real.
the same time saying, well, really, it should be within the authoritarian hands of the parents to dictate the kid's life.
It's
Because
beautiful.
whether
See,
you like it or not, a child and a teenager developing needs to have people they can talk to
mhm.
without fear of it being reported to the parents,
Yes.
especially if they're afraid that what they're going to say is going to be rejected by their parents.
This
And is
kind of
in
stuff
other
is in scientific papers, in
Yeah,
psychological
I mean
papers.
that's what
right,
friends.
children are not just the custodian. Their parents are not the only custodians. They're autonomous. They can make decisions about their life. You can't just force kids to live their life the way you want them to. The only
No, but
time
again,
parents get Yeah, but the only time you have to
not really
contact
what
the
I
parent
said.
when it's a legal matter, because it's up to the parents to make a legal decision. It's not always going to involve the parents,
Well, I'm
especially when
not
they're
saying
15,
that like.
16, 17.
Well, first of all, I do believe that kids have people to talk to other than their teachers. There are such things as friends and family friends. All I'm saying is that if you are an agent of the state who is charged temporarily with care for a child, which is essentially on loan to you from the parents, because that's what a public school is, because they don't have to be at a public school, they could be at a private school, then you have an obligation to report significant developments in their development if those developments are significant enough. Yes, 100%. And I would say that equivocating like parental authority to being like just as authoritarian as that, I think that's insane. I think families are a fundamentally
May I
different.
ask really quick, just real quick, real
I
quick,
mean, we're
John?
kind of
Who
repeating
else
ourselves
would?
here, but so we can move on soon if you like, Don, because I
Oh,
don't want
just I wanted to ask you real quick,
Yeah,
John.
last
Real
question
quick.
by Thomas, and we'll
I
move
mean,
on.
Yeah, who else can children tell about things than their teacher or their parents?
friends, family
No,
friends.
that can actually do something to help them.
What do you mean by help?
Like, as in, if the child is telling the teacher, "I'm getting beat when I go home."
I mean, beat. They can tell teachers if they're getting beat. That's fine.
Okay, so the main issue here is with the trans thing, then, right?
Yeah, because saying that, oh, let's wait till you're 18 maybe, and then see if you still feel the same way before we start doing anything. And in the meantime, we can take alternate forms of care that Don and I have talked about, and that's a huge longer conversation. Yeah, I wouldn't exactly call that the
What
same.
alternate forms of care?
This is another conversation, but
Is it care that's like validated by the medical establishment, or is it like conversion therapy care?
conversion therapy is like mandatory watching of a screen telling you you're wrong. No, of course not. I don't believe
That's not what conversion therapy is, though. Conversion
that's what
therapy is,
people think of when they hear conversion therapy.
well,
They think
no,
violence,
conversion therapy camps. No, people don't have like an exaggerated belief about them. You usually go to these like Christian
really?
camps where they're like, "Hey, we're going to learn ways to learn
Pray
that
the
you're
gay
actually
away.
not like that." Yeah, like pray the gay away shit. Would this all apply if a kid was gay? Like if they were like, my parents are horribly homophobic and I think I'm gay. Like if they told that to a parent, do you think, or to a teacher, do you think that would be like disclosure time?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I would be, if I could give you like a knee jerk opinion, but it wouldn't be thought out. So I tried
Yeah,
not to say
I
things.
think we're massaging this point to like its death.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean I agree. I think we've just gotten repetitive.
yeah.
We
So
know our
I will
fundamental
say,
disagreements, and that's
What
okay.
what
on
would
the point
persuade
of the
what would
value,
persuade you, John?
what
What
would
would
Yeah, that's a
persuade you?
good
Like
question.
let's say for instance we tried this. We mandated that teachers have to inform the parents of this, and we find that there's a spike in abuse of these kind of children, deaths of these kind of children, those sorts of things. Would that persuade you that this was a bad decision?
um, probably.
Probably.
Yeah,
That's
because there's a
really
million other
really concerning.
because there's a
Even
million other
even if this
factors.
produced more abuse and more death and more
More
kids
physical
killing
abuse.
themselves over this, you would probably be convinced. I mean, I don't know. I
Well,
don't know how much more
I can
strict you
I
get
can
about it.
tell you why. I always say probably in these hypotheticals because there's a million other variables. There's other policies that we could put in place that would mitigate those specific consequences. We could do things. There's other things that could be done to mitigate those consequences. Now, to my mind, it's hard to think of an obvious one, so I'm going to say probably. I probably agree with you, but when it comes to hypotheticals like that, where there's so many other confounding variables involved, I'm not going to give you a definitive yes, just because. I say probably because I'm like 90% sure, but there's always the 10% that you can figure out a way to mitigate those cases of abuse and stuff like that. And and make sure that that kind of stuff doesn't happen, because of course that's one of the deepest evils there is. So I realize that sounds bad at first blush, but really, I really am leaning.
I
If
mean, you're
children
holding
feel they
strong to
can't
your
trust
opinions.
their parents, and then you tell they then now you're just telling them now they can't trust the teachers either. Like I would imagine if I was in that position where I was questioning myself, wondering about what I was going to do, and then my options are I could tell my parents, might get beaten. Seriously, I'm in the southeast. That's just what happens.
Mhm.
Or I could tell my teacher, but my teacher might tell my parents. you know,
Well, I mean, if
who
you,
do
I
I
mean,
go
if you
to?
tell the teacher,
What
I
do
mean,
I do then, John?
well, the teachers and the state should figure out the likelihood of you actually being physically beaten. And unfortunately, it's hard for me to trust those mechanisms at the moment because I feel that they're ideologically captured in many ways. But in my ideal world, let's say that things work the way I want them to work, I think you'd be able to make a decent prediction as to whether or not the parents will be physically actually abusive, as opposed to this weird, vague, overly broad.
Well, mental abuse is still abuse. It's not
Mental
like
abuse
Right.
happens, and it's bad. It's bad,
There's
man.
again. We have different definitions of abuse on this, but for the definitions of abuse that we share, if you had Child Protective Services come in and they did an evaluation and they decided the likelihood of actual abuse, I would be cool with exceptions to the rule. But I think the general rule should be reporting. Yes.
Well,
Because
how
we
on
need
earth would you go
We're,
about
we're, we're,
properly
we're gonna
evaluating that? That
we're
doesn't make
gonna
any
Yeah, I
sense.
know we're going over. I know. I told you.
and then we're
It's
gonna
okay.
go back
Don
and
Don's
say
got some more stuff to do.
Yeah, I said 5 minutes ago.
yeah. I'm actually so annoyed about the internet issues, but that's okay. Things happen. People decide
Parental
to
authority, very,
hit
very
hit
controversial.
transformers with their cars down the street.
Thank you, John, for
So,
being a
Oh.
trooper, man.
yeah,
Yeah, hey, I'm the lone wolf.
I know you
That's
are. It's
fine.
okay.
that's
I know I
fine.
lost my
Yeah.
friend. I'm so sad about it.
was John a fascist or a retard? John is smart and not a fascist. I think John is probably one of those. John is one of those social conservatives who's very easily lured into fascism because he's susceptible to the narratives. Everything is like primed for him. He thinks that people are like naturally greedy and corrupt, so he has a low opinion of institutions and social standards. He has a very strong like impression of self-determination, even though he opposes self-governance and government in like the economy. He doesn't seem to take like he doesn't seem to be that like concerned with the media manipulation present behind all the transpanic stuff. Sounds like you're describing a libertarian. Libertarians are all either fascists or on the way to being fascists.